here at the Botanic Gardens of Sydney, at the Royal Botanic Gardens, just on the edge of Sydney Harbour. And our for you is that our Amorphophallus is substantially more open, although perhaps not as open as our Patricia flower was about the same time. So it's 9 p.m. here in Sydney, Australia, and Bridget has stuck her tubes, so to speak, back into the flower that we've got right beside me. So you can see Bridget sampling tubes, picking up the odour particles? Odour compounds. There we go. Odour compounds to be able to analyse back in the laboratory over the next few days. And from an update point of view, the flower is still cranking out heat. She's definitely stinky. Maybe it's burned my nostrils, but she's not as stinky as she was earlier in the evening. We still have lots of fly activity. And really interesting, we didn't see this in the Patricia bloom, but the blowflies that have come in this evening have been very active in the flower to the point where they have been, the female blowflies have been laying eggs, and the female and male flies have been copulating within the flower. And we'll post later on some imagery of the fly activity down in the bottom of the bloom. Been fascinating to watch, a little bit creepy perhaps to be a voyeur on the side watching it, but it's been really nice to see all these things that we can get up to up close and personal with this time. Was a bit hard when we had 28,000 visitors coming through. I'd like to introduce you to one of my wonderful colleagues in the Horticulture and Living Collections team here, Damian Wrigley. Come on in, Damian. Damian is the Manager of Living Collections and Conservation, and between us, we're going to have a crack at answering some of your questions. But maybe before we do that, Damian, could you perhaps explain what it is your job is, aside from wearing cool shirts like me? Maybe explain what your role is in the context of supporting our conservation efforts.
Yeah, sure. So thanks, John. So I'm the Manager of Living Collections and Conservation here at Botanic Gardens of Sydney. So I work across the 3 gardens looking after the collections with the curator managers and their teams, and also supporting Plant Bank with the seed collections that we hold there too. So implementing what we call our living collections strategy, it's a way for us to make sure that we're taking a bit of a more targeted approach to how we look after our collections, the way we source them, the way we curate them, and the way we use them.
Fabulous. Would you mind telling everyone a little bit about where these blooms came from and how we're contributing perhaps to the global conservation effort through individual flowers like this?
Yeah, sure. So we spoke about this a little bit in our What the Flora episode last year. So we're part of a global network of gardens that hold these plants in their collections. Ours came from the Botanic Gardens in the State Herbarium of South Australia, so specifically Mount Lofty Botanic Gardens, and Matt Coulter there is one of Australia's leading experts on these plants, having looked after them for a very long time. We have a collection across gardens that are all fairly closely related because of some work that Chicago Botanic Gardens did. So what we're hoping to do, like we did with Patricia, is collect some pollen, maybe be able to exchange that with other gardens and see if we can get a bit of genetic diversity within the collections in Australia, and see how we go. If not, maybe we have to think about going further afield throughout the global network.
Excellent. So we mentioned in an earlier update that we don't have any pollen this time round from any recent flowering in Australia to pollinate this flower with. So our efforts have been focused on observational criteria around things like her temperature. I'm going to need to stop saying her. It's not a her, it's actually a bisexual flower. So I should probably address that now. It's a bisexual flower that has male and female bits inside it, and we'll post some more images later on of what it looks like down inside the skirt. We're not going to pollinate the female flowers with Patricia's pollen because, if you missed it earlier, this is actually a clone of Patricia. It was made from a leaf cutting. It's genetically identical, and it's not actually good from a conservation effort to use the same pollen genetically on the same flower. And even if we did, it would probably be incompatible. It wouldn't produce fruit. But what we will do is bring Dr. Nathan Emery in from the Australian Plant Bank tomorrow night, and he will be harvesting pollen, which we'll take back to the Australian Plant Bank to process that, viability check it immediately so we get a sense of the quality of the pollen, and then store that away, hopefully for further research on the viability and length of pollen, trying to extend that through our scientific expertise for as long as possible and make that pollen available for other organisations. So we're going to have a crack at answering a couple of your questions. If you've got anything, keep throwing them at us. We will get to as many of them as we can as we do these live updates. And somewhere between Damian and myself, we will try and attempt to answer your tricky questions. So what have you got for us, Ella?
All right, we're going to chat about plants being monoecious, bisexual, intersex, and those various terms.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if there's any more to add on there, but in terms of the question, we've got how much does this one distinct weigh? Do you know the answer to that? In corn weight, perhaps?
We would have the weight, because we track the corms as they get repotted. So our teams in the horticulture team in the nursery, they do actually weigh them, and it's when they get to a certain weight, that's when we expect them to flower. So we can actually look back through our records and post that, what exactly the weight was on this one last time we weighed it.
Yeah, just for context, Patricia's corm was about 15 kilos in size, and I'd hazard a guess that just on the fact that this bloom is about 30 centimetres shorter, my guess is probably the corm was a little bit lighter in weight, which reflects the amount of energy it had to put into pushing up this bloom. But I'd be fascinated to know if that's the case.
Yeah, it's usually, I think it's over 10 kilos is when we start to see it get to that flower stage.
And just around world record size, about 150 kilos is about the largest corm that's been recorded, and the largest bloom's about 3 metres in height, so more than double this bloom.
Yeah, this one's very tiny.
Yeah.
We've got how long do you know it's going to flower, which I guess is an interesting one. At what point can you tell that it's going to be a flower versus a leaf?
Yeah, so the question is about how can we tell it's about to, or it's a flower and not a leaf? It's a bit like sexing chickens, perhaps. It's not immediately obvious, and you've got to go and look a little bit closer. The key determining factor is looking for this object here, the spadex, literally poking out from below the ground. So we've got a pot down here. I'm going to try and come in and show it. So this is our collection behind in the nursery. You can see varying ages of maturity. And if I get right down here to this pot, this little emerging bump right here is a baby leaf still yet to shoot. Now, over the next week or so, it will grow quite rapidly. We know in explaining how fast these flowers grow that they can grow at about 10 centimetres a day, and this would be no different. And at some point, it will differentiate itself visually for us as to whether it's going to continue as a leaf and end up looking a little bit like this one over here. This one behind me. You can see the PL structure above my head, or whether it would turn into a floral structure. And it's usually the spadex, that big spike that you see behind me, that's the differentiating feature. What's our next question? Ella?
You guys looking forward to some time off? You must have had a busy few weeks.
Oh, well, I kind of feel like a bit of a fraud because I was on holiday when Patricia went off. So this is my big event. So I suppose I don't get time off, but I think the rest of the team definitely deserves some.
Yeah, and I must admit, I just came back from holiday buying some new shirts, clearly. So I'm still energised off the back of Patricia. One of the things that draws all our staff together here at the Botanic Gardens of Sydney is our passion for plants, and we hope that you're picking some of that up. While it's nice to get paid for what we do as a job, these are really careers that we're invested in, we have a passion for, and we find it immensely rewarding to take care of more than 12,000 species from across the planet and growing every day.
Yeah, it's hard to believe that you actually get paid to do this work.
Some people are asking if they can have a little look at Patricia.
Sure.
Yeah.
So we will, Bridget's just finished her most recent sampling. So here's Patricia.
No,
Oh, sorry. See, that's how easily I forget. Here is our most recent bloom, I should say.
Stink.
Yeah, or stink. So it's doing particularly well. We'll see if we can grab some extra light for you. Might give Damian a torch and allow you to see down inside the flower. So hopefully you can see inside this time. We weren't able to do this in the last live stream for Patricia, but it's quite nice to be able to see that the petal here, the spathe, changes colour. It's got quite a waxy bloom down in the light section, and you can see the spadix, this big spike, is actually warm to touch. It's squishy and it's hollow on the inside, and it's the engine room of producing the odour. The chimney's up. Right down the bottom here, you'll be able to see the floral reproductive organs. So right at the bottom, we've got the female parts, and just hidden from view below the spadix, that big spike, is where the male pollen sits.
Does it feel velvety or waxy to touch?
Okay. Does it feel velvety or waxy? Let's see. So, it looks like my gimbal is having a little bit of an issue. So, help me out, Damian. What do you think it feels like?
It is kind of, it's more smooth and silky than velvety. So probably closer to waxy. Yeah, it's very, very cool.
And
Is it temperature or?
Yeah, this is cool temperature out here.
And that's reflected in our infrared imagery that we've taken, that the petal structure is quite cool, and the spadix here is still warm to touch, and hopefully Damian would be able to perceive that too if he touched it. Again, at some point we'll show you some infrared imagery that will reinforce that, and we're tracking sort of around the 32 degree mark down in the floral structure, and the spadix is about 28 degrees. So it's still warm and humid within this glass house. It's a warm Sydney night. This is, I'm not sure if you can see me squishing the spadix here, but it is air-filled, and by tomorrow morning it will start to collapse.
Did you want to show them where the flies have been?
I'll see if I can
Can you get that? So we've had a lot of green bottle flies crawling around inside, and you can see down there quite a few of them have spent quite a while laying eggs. So the big white mound that's down there. But they seem to have all calmed down and they've finished their business and they've left. But talking to people about these flies, it sounds like it's about 18 hours to 21 hours for maggots to hatch. So certainly got nothing to do with pollination in this case.
Definitely something we didn't expect to see, and something we didn't see last time. So it's this wonderful comparison between each of these blooms. We're able to gather this data. It might be completely useless to science, but it's just observational data that we haven't had before, and it's really lovely to see.
Yeah.
How does the smell compare from our queen, who I assume is Patricia?
Well, that's going to have to be you, John.
Okay, how does the smell compare? I actually don't know how to answer that. To be brutally honest, I have picked up tones of garlic in today's bloom that I perhaps wasn't so aware of until Bridget pointed out to me that is, I guess, a compound that's associated with some of the sulfur-based compounds that this plant produces. I still smell, I'm really sorry to have to say it, but I still smell public toilet, particularly the sanitary bin. I have to say it. I can't get away from that. I've had other people in particular with the last bloom detect things more like dead rodents and possum urine. And I guess it all just keeps mixing together. Maybe I'm not the best person to ask.
Well, a few of us have been touching this tonight, and what we've found is touching the spadix and then smelling our fingers actually smells a little bit like cheese.
Oh.
So it's not as disgusting as the smell we're getting.
Okay, I haven't done that.
Do you want to get Bridget's thoughts on what it smells like?
Come on, Bridget, come back in. What are you picking up right now?
Not a lot from that angle. Wait, let me get it again. Not a lot. It's less
calmed down a
stinky
lot.
right now. Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely toned down.
Yeah, which is maybe why we're not seeing as
okay.
many flies.
Less acidic, less sulfurous.
Less acidic and less sulfurous.
It's still like the underlying sweetness that I feel like is under everything, but I feel like the sulfur's the higher. I always describe smells in pitches.
Okay.
So like sulfur to me is very high pitched, and
Right.
like acidic, and then musky tones are like down here. So the odour is like here.
So you have death notes, is that what you're telling me? Okay, you heard it first. Bridget's PhD is going to be a composition in a totally different way.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's very like mid-range. There's no like either side of it. You know? Yeah,
Okay.
very no sulfur, really.
It's certainly not as strong as it was.
No, definitely not.
So we saw peak fly activity enter the building about 4.5 hours ago. So that probably was a sign where things were ramping up, whether we could smell it or not. But as Bridget just said in the background, I'm not sure if you could hear it, it's so warm. So that spadix is really still cranking a lot of heat out, and it's cooking all those compounds out to ensure the pollinators are still aware that this bloom is in flower. And we will prepare yourselves, people. We are going to shortly cut into the back of this flower just to get a better visual access on what's going on and to get some more data around the temperature profile. And it'll also prepare us for tomorrow's pollen removal. I will get it right eventually, pollen removal. So we'll get a window into the flower so that we can watch for the ripeness or the maturation of the pollen sacs. And that'll accelerate our ability to remove at the appropriate time and increase the chance of having viable pollen stored for another blooming, our increased chances of getting a fruit production to contribute to our ongoing global conservation efforts.
Yep.
Does the corm get warm?
Ooh, does the corm get warm? I don't know the answer to that.
Yeah, we don't have anything measuring that.
No. The corm is buried well within a rather large pot, as you can see down there. And I think it might be worth us looking at whether it does that later. It wouldn't make an awful lot of sense for the corm from an evolutionary point of view to get warm, because this is all about attracting pollinators, but it's possible. And aroids, of which this titanum arum is one, are not the only plants. Even plants like magnolias apparently have warming processes, and I will be that random guy in the future that goes out with an infrared camera when magnolias are in flower. So please excuse me if I'm in the garden looking creepy.
But I'd hazard a guess that if it was to warm the corm, that would actually just be taking energy away from the flower and the processes the flower has to go through.
Yeah.
So I'd suggest that, I mean, you obviously need to look into this more, but I would suggest that it's probably not going to be getting anywhere near as warm as the flower.
Yeah, I would agree.
Does not anyone want to broach a succinct answer to how does it create its heat?
Ooh.
Who wants to do thermogenesis?
Oh, I don't know if I know thermogenesis enough to be able to go into the technicalities, but we can certainly put some information online around that.
Yeah, there's a number of papers on thermogenesis in plants. I will be speculating as to how it works as well, but it's a rather cool tool that plants have evolved in certain groups to be able to produce this heat. So it was when we were recording the infrared images earlier, the flies were distinctly visible because they're cranking out such a large amount of internal energy that they were distinctly visible floating, hovering over the top of the flower as they fly around. But yeah, I'm not brave enough to go there either on the chemical biochemistry of thermogenesis.
Yeah, we need Professor Brett for that one.
We do, yes.
Might be similar, but what makes pollen viable or not viable? Or is that a Nathan question tomorrow?
Well, yeah, we could leave it for Nathan. It's one of those things, it's like anything, if it hasn't had the opportunity to have enough energy put into the process of developing the pollen, like developing an egg, like developing a seed, then it's just not going to be quite enough to produce a viable pollen. So if you, say, have a situation potentially like with Putricia where the palm house that Putricia was in was a little bit colder than the temperatures that we've got in this glass house and in the environment that it would normally exist in, it's likely that that has led to influencing its ability to produce pollen. But again, it could also be that the genetics of the plant that we have isn't good enough for producing pollen, and that happens in nature a lot anyway. Some plants just evolve to a point where they're actually no longer viable. They can't produce the pollen or they can't produce seeds, and that's why sometimes you end up with populations that are very small, very isolated, and they're not able to actually to propagate.
And it's also a critical reason why organisations like ours exist, to make sure that we properly consider the genetics of our individuals and make sure that when we are pollinating plants like this one, we go to the best efforts to get the most genetically diverse individuals so that the fertility remains high for any progeny that we produce.
Yes, there's a lot of work going on in Professor Brett's team. In the Research Centre for Ecological Restoration, basically they're looking at the genetics across a whole bunch of different native species with the intention of being able to help us make decisions about what we collect, what we might cross, and what we do with those in the future.
Got some other questions which I think are a good segue
Yeah,
from that.
fire at us.
Which is, someone says, and this might not count this one, but how come you can only buy clones of this and not grow it by seed?
How come we...
How come you can only buy clones of this? I think that's
Okay.
cutting clones.
Sure. We don't always intentionally try and acquire clones. In the instance of the collection behind us, we are in the process of rebuilding our genetic diversity, and the way of ensuring having backups of individuals, it's often wise to make clones of them. So with our Wallamai Pine Conservation Program, we have only 89, I think it is, a little bit less than 100 individuals left on the planet. To make sure that we have a robust conservation program, we make sure that we keep ourselves at minimum of 3 copies of every individual left in the wild, and we then distribute those copies to other botanic gardens across the globe as our backup or insurance population. So making clones is effectively an insurance population for us, and ideally when we have diverse access to pollen, we would aspire to only reproduce plants by pollination and seed collection, but that's not always possible. So in the intervening periods, to make sure disease doesn't riddle our plants, making a copy via a cutting or making a clone is a sound conservation practice.
Yeah, we can also have instances where it's actually really hard to grow things from seed. You can have a seed collection that just for whatever reason it doesn't germinate, or if it does germinate, the seedlings just don't get any older, they fail. So sometimes getting cuttings and making clones is the only option we have for reproducing the species that we have in our collections.
Cool.
Anything else, Ella?
I think a few people wanted to see where Patricia is at now in terms
Ah,
of
sure.
stage.
Yep.
So maybe we might
We can do that. So let me walk down just the collection again. So we've got about 13 individuals still within this collection and our aspiration to grow it. The largest collection in Australia is based in South Australia, to our knowledge, and we've just heard off the grapevine that our colleagues down at the Australian National Botanic Garden have a bloom possibly just happened. So I'm very excited for them. We know how exciting that is, and we wish them the very best in pollinating their individual if they can do so.
Yeah, so the Australian National Botanic Garden has one flowering. If you check out their Facebook page, I've been told you can book tickets online to go see the flower tomorrow or Monday. So if you're in Canberra, jump online and see if you can get a ticket.
Excellent, just a short hop down the road. So we wish them the very best. Let's have a look at our collection. So I mentioned earlier in the day, oops, sorry, our gimbal just had a little dummy spit. So we've got a number of individuals in varying stages. So the one that you can see here, if I can get my finger in the right place there, that is a leaf that's just collapsed a week or so ago. So it's gone into a dormant phase now. We've got a number of individuals in dormant phase. And we have, as I just whack my head on a glasshouse beam, we have Patricia down here. So this is our update here. She's now had her spadix removed up the top. We've got the peduncle down the bottom down here. And this is where her skirt, her petal attached, and that's been removed now to give her better air circulation. When we pulled that off, we had a little tear that occurred just down here. So what you can see here is a mixture of what appears to be successful fruit development and also individuals that have aborted. And if I move my way around, I might get Damian to come around the back side over here with the torch. You'll see on this side, it's a little bit more dire in that a lot of sections here, these where the berries would form, have actually aborted, and we've got some discoloration occurring down the peduncle. Now that's usually a sign of an unsuccessful fertilization event, and we're just going to have to watch and wait a little bit longer to see whether this peduncle actually continues to grow or whether it aborts completely. And if it does, it's not dire, because Patricia will then go back into a leaf stage and rebuild her energy over a number of years to get her corm back to a sufficient size that she will hopefully reflower in the not too distant future.
Lovely. Just a lot of love outpouring for nutrition for you guys.
Great.
Thank you. We're hearing and feeling all the love that's coming back in, and we're so pleased that we could give you updates and the exciting news that our second bloom is in flower. We've got a couple of pots that are still undecided which way they're heading, so hopefully there's more good news either in the coming months or in the coming years. And we look forward to continuing to give you updates on this bloom, particularly tomorrow night when we'll be harvesting the pollen. But our next step in a few minutes is to carve a hole in the back of her. Please wish us well with our operation. We'll be as gentle as we possibly can so that we can get a better insight into the inner workings of this flower and continue to learn about corpse flowers, titanarums, and everything else in between.
Thanks so much for the love, everyone. We appreciate it.
Back soon.